This story is about a man whose name eventually became synonymous with silence that costs more than gold. I will tell you how a biography without headlines, a provincial math teacher, a marginal financier, a guest at other people's parties, becomes an engineering blueprint of invisible power. There will be no car chases or guns here. What you will find here is something more frightening: silence, legally formalized, and dossiers assembled with cinematic precision. This story is usually dismissed as tabloid scandal. It is not a scandal. It is the instruction manual for the lock that holds the door. Take a map of the world. Remove the borders, the flags, the ceremonial speeches of leaders, and look at what remains. What remains are server racks hidden inside the walls of a tropical villa. What remains are bank terminals where someone's hand regularly presses the ignore button. What remains are lawyers with top secret security clearances defending the interests of a man without an academic degree. And what remains is one question that no one wants to answer out loud. Whose hand holds those hard drives today? The stakes here are not the reputation of a single billionaire. The stakes are the sovereignty of decisions made in your name. Laws about your taxes, electricity tariffs, sanctions against foreign countries, votes in foreign parliaments for foreign wars. If a high-ranking official has lived for years with the feeling that a single archive folder could erase his career in one evening, whose interests does he defend from the podium? Yours, or those of the person who holds the recording? We will follow a thin trail, a bunker beneath a beachside villa, a power of attorney issued without apparent reason, a night when two cameras simultaneously stopped seeing the right door. And what would you do if you found yourself in the shoes of someone who one day had an envelope placed on their desk, a sealed video recording, and was calmly told, "Sign the bill, and no one will ever know"? What matters more, your position, your name, your family, or one honest refusal that removes you from the public sphere entirely? Listen, this story is precisely about that. The price of silence in those who learned long ago how to weigh it. Before you lies an architectural blueprint, not the floor plan of a luxury Manhattan townhouse or the layout of a villa on a private Caribbean island. Try mentally stripping away all the decor, the marble, the gilding, the expensive rugs. Leave only the engineering. What do you see? Miles of fiber optic cable running through bedroom walls, server racks drawing the power of a small industrial facility, dozens of concealed camera lenses distributed across the entire perimeter. This is not the residence of a wealthy man. This is a professional television studio operating on continuous record mode, an all-seeing system built for one purpose: to capture every secret of those who consider themselves masters of the world. You may have come to feel that the story of Jeffrey Epstein is just another round of tabloid scandal that doesn't directly concern you. That feeling is mistaken. The people who visited that island are right now signing the laws that govern your taxes, approving energy tariffs, and authorizing the launch of military operations. Ask yourself, if a senior official is on the hook of an intelligence service because of a video involving minors, whose interests will he defend? Yours, or those who control the publish button? As long as these archives exist, we are all hostages to invisible blackmail. Over the next hour, we will not analyze sensational headlines. Instead, we will do what the official investigative bodies should have done: conduct a rigorous documentary audit. We will examine phone billing records, trace the routes of private jets, and follow every cent through offshore chains. The goal is to show not a portrait of a criminal, but the anatomy of one of the most complex intelligence operations ever run. We intend to prove that Epstein was not a party organizer, but the custodian of the most valuable commodity in geopolitics: human reputation. Welcome to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, New York, August 10th, 2019. We are inside a three-dimensional reconstruction of the Special Housing Unit, Divot South. It is cold here. The air smells of bleach and hopelessness. For a forensic criminologist, this place ceases to be a prison and becomes a database where every second carries evidentiary weight. In this system, where every step is logged, a chain of events begins to unfold whose probability approaches statistical zero. On the night of Epstein's death, the surveillance system, regarded as one of the most secure in any federal facility in the United States, failed, not partially. According to the official report, both cameras pointed directly at the entrance to his cell stopped functioning simultaneously. For any investigator, the word simultaneously in the context of dual redundancy is an immediate alarm signal. The probability of simultaneous accidental failure in both the primary and backup recording channels, precisely on the night the most important witness of the era is being held in this facility, is comparable to the probability of a meteorite landing on your head right now. This is not a technical malfunction. This is surgical intervention. Then there is the human factor. The two guards on duty in the special unit that night were required to perform rounds every minute, a basic requirement written in blood into the regulations. But on that particular night, they did not simply neglect their duties. They sat in the duty room and retroactively logged check-ins that never happened. Both later pleaded guilty to falsifying records, and yet remarkably avoided any real prison time. The system extended extraordinary leniency to them, likely because their silence was worth more to someone than their freedom. Let us now turn to the body. Forensic medicine is an exact science. It leaves no room for speculation. Dr. Michael Baden, who was present at the autopsy, pointed to a detail that contradicts the official suicide narrative. Epstein had a broken hyoid bone. In medical practice, this type of fracture is extremely rare in hangings using a sheet, especially with a low suspension point. However, it is a classic, almost textbook, injury in manual strangulation from behind, where pressure is applied to the throat until breathing ceases. The body points to violence. The official protocol dryly records suicide. We encounter here a paradox that might be called the inverted survivorship bias. In this case, only those with no significant information continue to exist. Those who were capable of naming the handlers and testifying about the principles die or disappear with striking regularity. This is not chaos. It is a methodical cleanup. Someone was operating with a scalpel, removing the key link in the chain to preserve the entire structure. Epstein's death is not the end of an investigation. It is the elimination of evidence. If we accept the version of a murder disguised as a suicide, a fundamental question arises. Who specifically benefited, and why at that particular moment? Epstein was preparing to negotiate a deal with investigators. He was ready to talk. His forced silence that morning reverberated deafeningly on Wall Street and in Washington. But to determine who gave the order, we must stop looking at the body and start looking at the money. How did a math teacher without a completed higher education come to possess the resources to purchase influence on this scale? This equation contains too many unknowns for standard methods. However, if we apply the principle of following the money, the picture begins to assemble itself. We will see transactions stripped of commercial logic, but possessed of impeccable operational logic. We will see banks ignoring transfers with 6 zeros despite their own security protocols. The death in a cell is merely the denouement. The beginning of this story lies in the offices where the fates of nations are decided, and in accounts that officially do not exist. The official version holds that a lone predator used his own money to satisfy his vices. The alternative version looks different. The system used the predator for the systematic collection of compromising material, and when the tool became toxic, he was disposed of. Right now, we will examine the first document confirming this version, evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was never the true owner of his money. He was merely its custodian. If we acknowledge that this capital did not belong to him, then who gave a math teacher without an academic degree the keys to a safe containing $1 billion? The answer is not in glossy publications, but in the gray lines of bank statements. To the untrained eye, it is simply a set of numbers and dates. To a forensic auditor, it is a chronicle of the impossible. In physics, a stone does not rise without an external force. In economics, a school teacher does not become the owner of the largest private mansion in Manhattan without a powerful external financial lever. The legend had it that Jeffrey Epstein was a financial genius who took wealthy clients' money and multiplied it. But Wall Street is a small village where everyone knows who earns what and how. If a trader consistently delivers 30% annual returns, his strategy is whispered about in the hallways of Goldman Sachs. In Epstein's case, silence. No one ever saw his trading orders. Not a single trader confirmed working beside him at a terminal. Instead of a black box generating profit, you find an empty box. The only real event in his biography, an anomaly of that Epstein called himself a headhunter. In professional slang, this term refers to specialists who recover stolen assets or shield them from tax authorities. This is the gray zone where private capital interests intersect with intelligence methods. It was then that he absorbed the main lesson. Money has no smell if you run it skillfully through a branching offshore network. And here we arrive at the document that demolishes the myth of a self-made fortune. Look at the power of attorney signed by Leslie Wexner, the owner of the Victoria's Secret Empire. This is not a standard asset management contract. This is a full general power of attorney. Epstein was granted the right to hire employees, acquire real estate, transfer funds, and sign documents on Wexner's behalf. In the world of big business, such authority is not granted even to close family members. This is only done with nominees. In professional parlance, a nominee is a human placeholder whose function is to sign where the real beneficiary does not wish to leave traces. An experienced businessman like Wexner transfers control over his entire fortune to a man he has known for barely any time at all. The only logical explanation within a financial forensics framework. This was not Wexner's money, and certainly not Epstein's money. This was transit capital in need of a reliable operator who would not ask unnecessary questions. Epstein's tax returns for the relevant period record yet another mathematical peculiarity. The great investor had exactly one client, Leslie Wexner. This contradicts the very nature of a hedge fund. A fund presupposes a pool of investors, risk distribution, diversification. Here instead there is a closed loop. One source of incoming funds, one operator, thousands of outgoing transactions. This is a classic money laundering scheme, or, in intelligence terminology, a funding channel for covert operations. Consider the scale of the task. Any serious intelligence service, whether the CIA or Mossad, regularly requires money that does not pass through congressional or Knesset approval. You cannot officially budget for bribing a foreign prime minister or staging a compromising encounter. For such operations, gray funds are established. Epstein was ideally suited to the role of treasurer of such a fund. No family, no reputation worth protecting, and the intellect to construct intricate schemes. Transactions flowed to the Virgin Islands, where they were broken into hundreds of small transfers, passed through shell structures in Luxembourg, and returned to the United States as impeccably clean real estate investments. The Manhattan mansion that Epstein supposedly purchased from Wexner was in reality transferred to him for $0 through a complex netting scheme. This is not a sale. It is the transfer of company housing to an employee who received a promotion. But such services come at the cost of one's own independence. Epstein gained access to the elite, private jets, and the ability to build his own empire. In exchange, he became the custodian of other people's secrets and other people's money, a living offshore account. As long as the money flowed through the pipes, the system turned a blind eye to what was happening in his apartments. Banks flagged warning signals, but the compliance control mechanism, designed to catch terrorists, strangely malfunctioned precisely on the name Epstein. Recall Stephen Hoffenberg, Epstein's mentor and early business partner. Together they ran one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, Towers Financial. Hoffenberg received 20 years in prison. Epstein walked away untouched, without even being charged. This cannot be explained by simple luck. It is called informant immunity. Already in the early Devanostos, someone was keeping him free. He was being groomed for a considerably larger game than the mere theft of pension savings. The entire financial structure, this house of cards built from offshore accounts and shell funds, served one purpose. Money was merely the fuel. The primary product of the Epstein enterprise was information. The mansion on East 70th Adin Street was not a home. It was an operational headquarters financed from sources that cannot be traced. The walls hung with original paintings concealed miles of surveillance wiring. Gradually, an understanding takes shape of why Epstein felt untouchable. He understood. His accounts were essentially the wallets of very powerful people and structures. Freezing his assets would have meant paralyzing the shadow budgets deployed in geopolitical operations. He was not merely a wealthy criminal. He was the system administrator of a global corruption server. Now that it has been established that the money belonged to others, and that the billionaire status was merely a cover legend, we must trace where these resources were directed. They did not settle in Swiss banks. They took physical form, transformed into concrete, steel, and fiber optics. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowed toward a tiny strip of land in the Caribbean Sea, where, far from prying eyes, a facility was being built that would become the chief trap of the 21st century. To a tourist, Little St. James Island looked like a tropical resort. To an analyst studying satellite imagery, this island presented as a highly complex engineering anomaly. Look at the map through the eyes of a technical intelligence specialist. The first thing that stands out is infrastructural excess. On an ordinary private island, problems of water supply and food logistics are being solved. Here, the problems being solved were those of industrial espionage. Import declarations from that period record purchases of server equipment, cooling systems, and cabling in volumes sufficient to run the data center of a small bank, but not a beach villa. The central element of this enigma is the structure that the press dubbed the temple. High-resolution images show it bears no characteristics of a religious building, strange geometry, no religious symbolism, yet massive reinforced walls. Engineering analysis unambiguously points to a bunker. Walls of that thickness are not built for prayer. They are built to protect physical data storage media from outside penetration or destruction. Epstein is commonly assumed to have been a lover of luxury, but analysis of construction cost breakdowns destroys this image. The majority of the budget went not to marble and gold, but to low-voltage systems. Contractors who worked on the island subsequently testified to miles of concealed wiring. Every guest cottage, every bedroom, every bathroom was enmeshed in a network of sensors and microphones. This was not the architecture of comfort. It was the architecture of total control. Here the central paradox arises. Why would a man of wealth turn his own home into a studio running on 24/same record mode? The answer lies in the realm of operational work. The island was designed as the perfect honey trap. In intelligence terminology, this is a prepared environment where the blackmail target feels completely safe, while every one of his actions is recorded in digital format. Former island staff who violated their non-disclosure agreements described a surveillance system more complex than the security systems of Las Vegas casinos, but with one fundamental difference. Casino cameras are intentionally visible to deter cheaters, while Epstein's cameras were invisible because their task was to record compromising material on members of the elite. It was a compromat production line, where the guest was not a client, but raw material for processing. Note the data transmission infrastructure. The island was connected to the mainland via dedicated communication channels, with bandwidth that would be excessive even for modern streaming platforms. The explanation is simple. Video streams were duplicated in real time to remote servers. That is precisely why, after the FBI raids, when physical storage media were seized, many powerful figures continued to be nervous. Copies existed somewhere else. The island's landscaping also reveals the true purpose of the facility. Trees and shrubs were planted not for beauty, but to create blind spots from the waterside, while simultaneously preserving ideal viewing angles for the interior cameras, a standard technique in the design of secure facilities. The island was a stage whose set design guided politicians, princes, and scientists precisely toward those points where lighting and acoustics were optimal for recording. The scale of investment in covert surveillance equipment cannot be the whim of a private individual. It is the budget of an intelligence agency. An ordinary voyeur installs a camera in one room. Epstein, however, built an entire ecosystem in which the walls of the temple concealed a server room consuming terabytes of video files. This was the archive of the sins of Western civilization for 20 years. Investigators uncovered a notable detail in the design of the temple's doors. From the outside, they could not be opened without a special keycard, while from the inside, they were trivially locked. This is the standard construction of a safe room. The island operated as an autonomous state with its own rules, but the most terrifying part was hidden underground. Infrastructure blueprints indicate the presence of extensive basement spaces with a ventilation system designed for the long-term accommodation of large numbers of people. This is not a wine cellar. It is infrastructure for detaining and trafficking human beings, a mechanism lubricated by Wall Street money and sheltered behind diplomatic immunity. Now that the technical equipment of the operation has been reconstructed, the servers, cameras, bunkers, a logical question arises. Who managed this complex software? Epstein was the facade, the administrator, but not the architect of this social engineering. He lacked the sophistication and the connections within the old European elites. The system required a person who had absorbed the rules of espionage and manipulation from childhood. We look at the island and see a stage, but every play has a director, a person who remained in the shadows while Epstein played the role of the eccentric billionaire. To find the one who pulled the strings, we need to travel across the ocean, to where the story of the math teacher ends and the story of a hereditary spy dynasty begins. Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, the funeral of media magnate Robert Maxwell. This is not merely the farewell to a businessman. Look at the faces in the front row. The Prime Minister of Israel, President Chaim Herzog, the leadership of Israeli intelligence. The honors being paid here to a British citizen resemble the state funeral of a national hero, and this is no coincidence. Robert Maxwell was not merely a newspaper magnate. The British Foreign Office officially acknowledged him as a man who had managed to work simultaneously for British MI6, the Soviet KGB, and Israeli Mossad. He was an information broker of planetary scale. Yet a few days before this scene, his body had been found drifting in the waters of the Canary Islands, next to a yacht named after his beloved daughter, the Lady Ghislaine. The official version, an accident. In the world of intelligence services, such accidents are called tying up loose ends. It is at her father's grave that we find the key figure of our investigation, Ghislaine Maxwell. At that moment, she appears to be the broken heir of a collapsed empire. Newspapers reported that her father had left behind a £400 million hole in pension funds. She should have become a pariah. Instead, Ghislaine Maxwell took a step that defies the logic of a society lady, but fits perfectly into the protocol of an intelligence operative. She immediately relocated to New York. The meeting of Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein in the early $10,000 is not a romantic story. It is a merger of assets. At that point, Epstein was a financial adventurer with a dubious reputation and Leslie Wexner's money, but without access to the pinnacles of society. Ghislaine Maxwell was technically bankrupt, yet in her hands was her father's most valuable asset, his address book. The contacts of princes, presidents, and oligarchs who had been in the elder Maxwell's cultivation for years. She brought Epstein not money, she brought him access. Intelligence analysts working with open sources characterize this as a transfer of operational control. In photographs from those years, Ghislaine Maxwell is always present nearby, but slightly behind. She is not merely a companion, she is a handler. Epstein was a blunt instrument, a battering ram that broke down doors. Ghislaine Maxwell was the architect who built, behind those doors, the most intricate social labyrinths. It was she who taught the Brooklyn boy how to distinguish an oyster fork from a fish fork, and more importantly, how to understand the psychology of elites. But the Maxwell family legacy is not only connections, it is also technology. While Ghislaine Maxwell was settling in New York, her sisters Isabel and Christine Maxwell were building careers in Silicon Valley. They founded a company and participated in deals related to data analysis software. Here, a fact highly inconvenient for American intelligence services comes to light. The Maxwell family was closely connected with the sale of software systems of critical importance for national security. We are talking about developments akin to the PROMIS system, software which, according to numerous investigations, contained a backdoor for Israeli intelligence. The Maxwell sisters operated in the gray zone between the IT business and espionage. The FBI was using software to which the super agent's family had direct or indirect access. This is not a hobby, it is a family trade. Information is a currency, and the Maxwells knew how to extract it better than anyone. Ghislaine Maxwell transferred this technological approach to working with people. Her role in organizing the trafficking of girls is often reduced to primitive pimping, but this is the error of oversimplification. She operated as a staff officer of an intelligence service, selecting victims perfectly matched to the profile of a specific target. Vulnerable, young, often from troubled families. Victims trusted her because she was a woman. The classic honey trap scheme raised to an industrial standard. Follow the routes of her movements. Ghislaine Maxwell did not merely accompany Epstein. She piloted helicopters, managed logistics, organized meetings at the United Nations through her own foundation, Tethamar. This foundation, formally dedicated to protecting the oceans, served as the perfect cover for obtaining diplomatic status and access to restricted waters. She created a state within a state, with her own fleet and effectively her own diplomatic passport. The financial side of her life is no less mysterious than her father's biography. After Robert Maxwell's death and the confiscation of family assets, Ghislaine Maxwell continued living in Manhattan in regal style. The source of funds was never established by investigators. But if one accepts the hypothesis that she continued her father's work, the answer is obvious. She was financed by the same structures that had previously paid for the operational work. Operational expenses are covered from closed funds for as long as the operation yields results. Connections to the intelligence services of 3 states kept Ghislaine Maxwell untouchable for decades. She was not hiding. She posed in photographs next to Bill Clinton and Elon Musk, sitting in the pilot seat of Epstein's plane. This is the behavior of a person confident in the reliability of her insurance policy. Her confidence was based on the fact that she was not merely an accomplice in crimes, but the keeper of the keys to the compromat archive that her father had begun assembling. Thus, the true structure of this organization comes into view. Epstein was the shop window concealing a complex information-gathering mechanism, and the operating system of that mechanism, its source code, was Ghislaine Maxwell. She combined Wall Street money, Silicon Valley technology, and classical intelligence methods into a single weapon of mass reputational destruction. They created the perfect product for the shadow market of geopolitics, controlled chaos. But any product must be sold. To understand how exactly this compromising material was converted into power, and why a bedroom video from the island was worth more than gold bullion, we need to break down the economics of fear. To the outside observer, what was happening looked like an entertainment club for the elite, but if you view it through the eyes of a forensic accountant, an entirely different picture emerges. Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were not simply providing girls. They created a standardized product for the shadow market of geopolitics, demand for which exceeded any supply. The currency in this industry is neither dollars nor gold. It is a biological response. In a moment of stress, the pupil dilates. Cortisol levels spike sharply. It is precisely this moment, captured by a hidden camera, that transforms a powerful person into a controllable puppet. This is the alchemy of power for which the island was built. In the professional slang of intelligence services, there is a specific term for this: Operation Brownstone, a code name for multi-layered sexual blackmail schemes whose goal is not extortion, but the long-term recruitment of agents of influence. The name alludes to the brownstone mansions where such traps were traditionally set in Washington and New York. The essence of Operation Brownstone is to create a situation from which there is no dignified exit. The target finds themselves in a controlled environment where their secret vices are documented with cinematic precision. From that moment, the politician, banker, or scientist ceases to belong to themselves. They become an asset on the operator's balance sheet, and their value is determined not by their wealth, but by their administrative leverage. The psychological profile of people caught in Epstein's web displays a disturbing pattern. The fear of public reputational destruction among public figures is so powerful that it suppresses the survival instinct and even patriotism. A person threatened with the publication of a video involving minors is prepared to follow orders that directly contradict the national interests of their country. This makes Epstein's archive more powerful than a nuclear briefcase. Nuclear weapons are a deterrent instrument that will most likely never be used. Compromat works every day. A single phone call from a handler can change a Senate vote, derail a trade deal, or force a prosecutor to turn a blind eye to the theft of billions of dollars. The economics of this mechanism are unique. In ordinary business, a product is sold once. In a blackmail system, silence is sold infinitely. It is an asset with unlimited returns. The victim pays with their decisions, signatures, and influence for years, up to death or political oblivion. This is the perfect form of 21st century slavery. A forensic accountant analyzing this scheme sees not a crime of passion, but cold calculation. Epstein's social graph of connections resembles a map of epidemic spread. One recruited politician brings the next, creating clusters of controlled elites. This was not simply a network united by a common vice. It was a parallel system of state governance. That is precisely why the island was equipped like a fortress. The server racks on Little St. James did not merely store video files. They stored the keys to offices in London, Washington, and Paris. Whoever owned those hard drives held real power, while the official leaders were merely actors reciting an imposed script. But any intelligence operation, however perfect it may be, requires enormous financing. The maintenance of mansions, private jets, payment for recruiters and technical staff. This is millions of dollars per month. Money leaves a trail that cannot be fully erased, and that trail leads to those who knew everything that was happening, yet continued to sign the checks. For such a machine to operate, it requires accomplices in the financial sector, banks that see everything and choose to notice nothing. Let us step across the threshold of the sterile compliance department, the internal police of any major bank. There is no blood here, no gunpowder, only the hum of servers and the flicker of monitors. This is precisely where the main crime was committed: conscious inaction. The forensic accountant studying transaction logs sees a picture difficult to comprehend with reason. On the screens, the security system was generating red alerts tagged human trafficking and suspicious activity. Algorithms configured to detect terrorists were sounding the alarm, but someone's hand, possessing the highest level of authorization, again and again pressed the ignore button. Consider the scale of cynicism. Epstein withdrew between $40 and $80,000 in cash per month. In the modern banking system, any transaction exceeding $10 is automatically routed to financial intelligence review. Such activity is not merely a red flag, it is a flare gun. These bundles of banknotes were used to pay recruiters and cover victims' transport costs. The money left a physical trail. Bank clerks saw the withdrawals, managers knew the purpose of the payments, but the accounts continued to function. The security system was not shut down by hackers from outside, but by administrators from within. In 2020, the New York Department of Financial Services settled the question of whether this was negligence. Deutsche Bank was fined $150 million. In the regulator's official document, it is written in black and white. The bank ignored hundreds of transactions that unambiguously pointed to Epstein's criminal activity, including payments to known accomplices. But Deutsche Bank was not alone. The financial giant J.P. Morgan Chase agreed to pay $290 million to Epstein's victims. Think carefully about this figure. This is not charity. This is the price of silence. Hush money to ensure that the details of internal documentation never reach an open court. Here, a paradox arises that demands your attention. If you try to transfer a large sum to a relative abroad, you will be subjected to endless checks. Epstein transferred millions without a single question asked. This proves the existence of a two-tier banking system. One, for you and me, with total oversight. Another, for the chosen few, where rules are disabled manually. Why did the banks take this risk? The commissions from Epstein's accounts were negligible at the scale of trillion-dollar turnovers. The reputational damage? Colossal. Logic suggests one thing. The bankers were not afraid to lose Epstein, but to lose those who stood behind him. He was the gatekeeper to capital that could not be put at risk. Closing his account meant declaring war on the shadow elite. The forensic audit reveals that Epstein's status in the banking system was tagged as ultra-high net worth individual, manual override mode. Any automatic block was lifted by a call from above. This turned the world's largest financial institutions into technical service staff for human trafficking. Without the ability to instantly transfer funds to offshore accounts, without access to cash in industrial quantities, the entire blackmail and recruitment scheme would have stalled within a week. The blood of this system is dollars, and the heart that pumped that blood beat on Wall Street. But money and power eventually grew tiresome. Analyzing Epstein's financial flows in his later years, we discover a curious shift. Funds were flowing not into offshore accounts, but into university laboratories. He wanted something that cannot be purchased at a bank. He wanted immortality. The routes of the private jet increasingly lead not to offshore zones, but to Boston and Cambridge. We leave the stifling bank vaults and enter the sterile corridors of Harvard and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Here, at the epicenter of world science, a man without a completed higher education felt not like a guest, but like the owner. The photo archives of those years contain extraordinary images. Stephen Hawking aboard a submarine off the shores of that very island. Marvin Minsky, the father of artificial intelligence, at a private conference in the mansion. Epstein was not merely donating money, he was purchasing access to the planet's intellectual nerve center. Why would a financial adventurer invest tens of millions of dollars in theoretical physics, neuroscience, and genetics? The answer lies in the psychology of a man who had bought everything that is for sale. Power and luxury had grown stale. Only one adversary remained that could be neither blackmailed nor bribed: death. And he decided that science would be his final deal. Epstein became a fanatical adherent of transhumanism, the movement that views the human body as an outdated biological platform in need of an upgrade. He funded research not out of philanthropy. He was searching for specific technologies, methods for digitizing consciousness, editing the genome, cryonics. He seriously planned to have his head and genitals frozen for future revival. But his ambitions extended far beyond personal immortality. Investigators gained access to the architectural plans of his ranch in New Mexico. Among the residential spaces, analysts discovered medical units resembling reproductive technology laboratories. This was the base for implementing a plan that Epstein called his greatest legacy. According to witness testimony and leaks from his inner circle, he planned to select devout, intellectually and physically gifted women and impregnate them with his seed. In his narcissistic imagination, it was his DNA that constituted the gold standard of evolution. This sounds like the script of a cheap science fiction film, but before us are the dry facts of an investigation and the testimony of real people. Evil turns out to be not banal, but ideological. Madness backed by the budget of a small nation. The most alarming aspect of this story is the silent complicity of the scientific community. Nobel laureates, the brilliant minds of the era, accepted his checks for years. They attended his dinners, heard his arguments about genetic superiority, saw young girls in his entourage, and preferred to look the other way. To them, Epstein's money smelled neither of blood nor of madness. In essence, Epstein was attempting to revive eugenics, the pseudoscience of human breeding condemned by the entire civilized world after the Nuremberg trials. But in his distorted reality, the laws of morality were designed for ordinary people. He placed himself in the caste of the chosen, for whom biological expediency stands above ethics. In this context, Little St. James Island and the New Mexico Ranch form a unified system. The island was a testing ground for collecting compromising material and controlling the present through the blackmail of elites. The ranch was intended to become a laboratory for seizing the future through genetic expansion. Total power over society and total power over biology, two sides of the same coin. The archives of the ranch remain to this day one of the most closely guarded secrets, and many documents have likely been destroyed. We see only the tip of the iceberg, intentions recorded with the precision of an engineering project. But even with all of this, with billions of dollars, the best lawyers, and the loyalty of scientists, an ordinary criminal with such a record would have been behind bars long ago. The answer to the question of Epstein's untouchability lies not in the laboratories. It lies in a legal folder dated 2008. Let us examine this story through the eyes of a forensic auditor accustomed to seeking anomalies in contracts. Before us is not merely corruption, but a legal anomaly without precedent in United States judicial practice. Normally, when a federal prosecutor prepares a 50-page indictment describing dozens of episodes of abuse of minors, the machinery of justice moves in only one direction, toward the destruction of the accused. But in Florida, the opposite happened. Instead of the life sentence that federal law threatened Epstein with, the system suddenly received the command, "Stop." The scene that unfolded in the prosecutor's office resembled negotiations between nuclear powers more than a criminal proceeding. The outcome was a document that lawyers call the deal of the century, though it would be more accurately described as the capitulation of the state. The non-prosecution agreement, NPA, effectively placed Epstein outside the reach of ordinary law. The key piece of evidence here is not speculation, but the direct words of an official. Alexander Acosta, who held the position of U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida at the time, and subsequently became Secretary of Labor in Donald Trump's cabinet, gave an exhaustive explanation of his actions. At his confirmation hearings, he stated that he had been instructed to back off the case and reach a deal because Epstein belonged to intelligence. The phrase, "belong to intelligence," is perhaps the most weighty piece of evidence in our investigation. It moves the case from the realm of criminal reporting to the domain of national security. Let us analyze the text of the 2000 agreement as a financial contract. Exactly what did Epstein purchase at the cost of his freedom? The document guaranteed immunity not only to him but also, and I quote, to any potential co-conspirators. This is a legal absurdity. Standard prosecutorial practice is to make a deal with the accused in order to obtain the names of accomplices. Here, instead, the deal was made so that those names would remain a secret forever. It was, in effect, an insurance policy for all high-profile guests of the island whose names might surface in a public proceeding. Note the composition of the defense team. Epstein's interests were not merely represented by expensive lawyers. This was the heavy artillery of American jurisprudence. Kenneth Starr, who initiated the impeachment of Bill Clinton, and Alan Dershowitz, who defended O.J. Simpson. Deploying experts of this caliber, possessing top-level security clearances, for a prostitution case in Florida looks like firing a howitzer at sparrows. Unless the defense's task was something considerably larger than preserving the reputation of a single billionaire. Epstein's conditions of detention following the agreement also defy the logic of the penitentiary system. Instead of a federal prison, 13 months in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail, with the right to leave his cell for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for so-called work. This is not a prison sentence. It is house arrest with a government institution as a hotel. During these hours of freedom, he continued to hold meetings, manage financial flows, and presumably destroy evidence that had not been seized in the first search. To the forensic accountant, this scheme looks like a classic asset protection maneuver. When a corporation discovers that one of its subsidiaries has become toxic, it isolates it, pays down the debts, and classifies its accounts to protect the parent company. In this case, the parent company was the intelligence service handlers, and the toxic asset was Jeffrey Epstein himself. The 21 deal was not a miscarriage of justice. It was the bureaucratically formalized evacuation of an agent who knew too much. This precedent destroys the myth of equality before the law. We see a clear division. There are laws for citizens, and there are exception protocols for intelligence assets. Alexander Acosta, by signing that document, effectively acknowledged that the interests of the intelligence services stand above the criminal code. Epstein was not prosecuted as a pedophile because his functions as a compromat collector and treasurer of covert operations were deemed by the state to be too valuable or too dangerous to disclose. By 2004, the system did not merely know about Epstein's activities, it officially took him under protection, effectively issuing a license to continue the operation. The immunity granted to potential co-conspirators became the foundation for the next decade of impunity. The island continued to operate, cameras did not stop recording, private jets continued to fly. The legal death of the Florida case marked the beginning of a new life for the blackmail empire, which collapsed only when Epstein himself became more dangerous, dead than alive. The federal agents who entered the Manhattan mansion after Epstein's arrest encountered a deafening silence. The safes had been opened and emptied, server racks powered down, hard drives physically removed before the FBI arrived. We began this investigation with the question of who killed Jeffrey Epstein, and arriving at the conclusion, we realized that this question is secondary. The physical elimination of the operator in a prison cell was merely the final step in a corporate bankruptcy procedure. Far more important is what happened to the assets of this corporation. The archive assembled over decades, terabytes of video recordings, financial transactions, and genetic data of the world's elite did not disappear. It simply changed hands. Throughout this investigation, we methodically peeled the glossy wrapper of celebrity gossip from this story, layer by layer. We saw that the island was not a resort, but a complex technical apparatus for the production of compromising material. We established that bank transactions amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars had no market justification and constituted budget financing for intelligence services. We determined that Ghislaine Maxwell was not an accomplice, but a staff officer who ran the facility. Epstein was not the great Gatsby of our time. He was the system administrator hired to maintain the servers on which the conscience of Western civilization is stored. The absence of high-profile arrests among Epstein's clients following his death is not a failure of justice. It is the primary evidence that the system is operating in normal mode. In the world of real politics, compromising material loses its value at the moment of publication. As long as the recording lies in a secure vault, it is an absolute weapon. It compels presidents to sign unfavorable treaties and prime ministers to vote for foreign wars. The fact that the island's visitor logs have never become the basis for criminal proceedings says one thing. The insurance policy underwritten by the intelligence services continues to be in force. These people are free not because they are innocent, but because they are controllable. We are accustomed to thinking about corruption as suitcases of cash. The Epstein case demonstrates the evolution of control. Modern power rests not on bribery, but on the industry of managed shame. Epstein created an exchange where reputation was converted into geopolitical influence. And the most terrifying aspect of this scheme is that it is fully automated. Banks ignoring red flags, prosecutors signing immunity deals, scientists accepting grants from a pimp, all of them were merely gears in a mechanism lubricated by fear and greed. The system did not fail. The system successfully defended itself, excising the necrotic tissue in the form of one compromised agent. Now that you have the complete picture, from the blueprints of hidden cameras in bedrooms to the signatures on non-prosecution documents, the time has come to deliver a verdict. We have gathered the evidence scattered across thousands of pages of court records and bank statements. The final judgment remains yours. Please write in the comments what you thought of this story. I need to understand whether it grabbed you. Do you think Ghislaine Maxwell acted on her own conviction when she continued her father's work? Or was she simply following orders? And tell us also, do you prefer watching horizontal video or vertical for your phone?